Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and it is time for me to talk about all the Hugo and Nebula award winners I read in November. Warning, a few of these I may go through quite quickly because they weren't very good or they didn't have an impact on me, or I read them so long ago that I'm starting to forget what they were actually about. Probably because they didn't have an impact on me. Also, sorry if I'm a little bit more like sarcastic or snarky than I intend to be in this. I'm going to be talking about some books I didn't really enjoy and I'm having one of those mornings. So let's just get straight into it. First, I read They'd Rather Be Right by Mark Clifton and Frank Riley. This book has a terrible reputation as the worst winner of a Hugo Award. And I agree, it was not good. Superficially, it comes across as being okay, as being intelligent. It's about a supercomputer that they eventually use to reverse aging and convey immortality through psychotherapy. Don't make any sense today, but that's the gist of it. But when you dig deeper into it, if you analyze it, it's very internally inconsistent and really like awfully dogmatic, axiomatic in its statements about science and scientists and the world and various things. And I'm like, make up your mind, because you're contradicting yourself, but you're also saying things that I don't think are true. Anyway, I don't recommend this book. I think you should only try to read it if you want to experience the worst Hugo Award winner, or if you're trying to read all of the Hugo Award winners like I am. It's just not worth the time. A Deepness in the Sky by Vernor Vinge. I have forgotten too much about this book already since I read it on audiobook. I promised to talk about it in more detail and I think I'm going to fail you, so I'm sorry about that. It's actually a prequel taking place thousands of years before the other book in this series, A Fire Upon the Deep. And I thought it was okay. It was really grim, it was depressing, it's basically one faction enslaves another faction while they are trying to exploit aliens they discovered on a planet that's very distant, and they spend decades trying to get the aliens to an advanced level of technology that they can repair their ship and get away. So you have a lot of people who are like mind enslaved for decades with these horrible people, and a lot of passages from the aliens' perspectives that are written like they're living in a 1950s English village. There's actually a reason for that, but I didn't think it was a very strong reason. But I did enjoy reading the aliens' perspectives far more than the humans, because while they were awful too sometimes, they weren't enslaving people and wiping their minds and raping them or torturing them to death, or things like that. Vinge is probably not for me. His writing style is very lengthy, explanatory. He's very slow at moving plots along. So if you like digging into a really long 700-page tome and just enjoying the action as it slowly unfurls, then Vinge's probably for you. But I feel like I get stuck in a rut and I just can't get out and I just want it to end, so that's Vinge for me. The Uplift War by Brin. This is the third and final book in the Uplift saga. I haven't read the first book, but I read the second book, Startide Rising, back in September because it was Hugo and Nebula Award winner. The Uplift War is set on Garth, a planet that humans have been given. They're colonizing it, and there's rumors that there is basically an indigenous life there that could be uplifted to sentience, and this alien species really objects to humanity's status as a wolfling species that doesn't have its own patron species that uplifted them. They think that they're uppity. They think we're really, really uppity. So they make up this reason to attack Garth and take over the planet. They want the Garthlings to take as their client race. And this is, how to describe this, a 1980s dude bro adventure science fiction series, and to the point where the main male human character wants to be Tarzan and he becomes Tarzan. There are just elements of this book and of the previous book too that I feel borders on the ludicrous. Like, it's so ridiculous it's enjoyable. But there is nothing like super fundamentally wrong with it. It just doesn't strike me as a really great thing in a science fiction book or something. The evil alien species, our antagonists, are basically chickens. They are bird aliens, and they also have like an avian client race. You cannot make this up. They're called the Kwaku. I think my major problems with this book, actually, beyond all the superficial stuff that I just don't enjoy because I'm me and I have my own opinions and tastes, is that this repeats the same problems I had with Startide Rising. The writing, the prose, isn't that good. There's more bad poetry. The characters, not so great. Really dude bro adventure. All of the really major ethical underpinnings of the patron-client system, the way the whole galaxy is run, are never really addressed, just kind of superficially. And all the things I was really interested in with the world building, like the library and how the library works and where it comes from and everything, are never talked about. So essentially, everything that I was interested in and wanted to know more about, the series is not actually about. Then I read The Demolished Man by Alfred. This was published in 1952, I think, and it won the very first Hugo Award, and I can see why. This book was really good, very entertaining, very vividly written. I think that Bester had a background in writing commercials or advertisement, and I could really see that in the way he uses language and descriptive terms. It's very zingy and zappy, and he's using language and phrases cleverly to hook you, to hook the characters. There's this repetition of this song that's supposed to be an earworm, and it really is an earworm. It was just so catchy, and it'll drive you batty by the end. It's ominous. The plot is very straightforward. The richest man in the world wants to murder his corporate rival. He's a really awful person. He's so messed up, and he unapologetically wants to kill this guy, and the book embraces it. And that's why I enjoyed it, because the main character is supposed to be unlikable, and the whole story revolves around that. But the problem is he wants to commit a murder, but there are telepaths whose job it is to detect possible crimes and prevent this from ever happening. There hasn't been a successful murder in like 80 years, so how is he going to evade the ESP people and kill this guy? And also, why does he want to kill this man? I think this is one of the oldest science fiction novels I've ever read, and I was surprised at how much it entertained me. It hooked me right away, and I felt like it wasn't nearly as dated as some books I've read from more recent decades. Continuing the trend of reading 1950s science fiction novels that I didn't expect to like but then really enjoyed, we have Double Star by Robert Heinlein. This is the fourth book I've read by Heinlein. I've read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, and Starship Troopers, and this one was the most enjoyable. Like, I really thought this was entertaining, actually funny in some places, and had a really good like character story arc, some good character development. The only thing I didn't like about it is that the one female character is a secretary, is madly in love with her much older boss, at one point calls a man daddy, and is threatened with spanking by another man at one point. Other than that, the book is about an actor who is hired to impersonate a very powerful political figure. Initially, he seems very arrogant about his skill. You think maybe he might be a con artist in some way, that he's kind of a hack, but throughout the book, as he tells the story himself, you really get a look at him and how good he is at what he does, and this really complicated and weighty job that he undertakes. I was also really surprised that I didn't really know what the ending was gonna be. By halfway through, I had like 3 or 4 ideas of where this might end up, and one of them happened, but it kept me guessing at multiple points about ultimately how this was going to turn out, and I thought that was really good. I'm not sure this is a more lighthearted book than the other things I've read by Heinlein, but it definitely had more moments of humor and just that space adventure feel like earlier science fiction has, and not so heavy on world building or the science or anything. It's just a story that takes place on a kind of solar system level, and mostly it's about a guy impersonating somebody else. I'm really glad that I read this book by Heinlein. I wasn't really looking forward to reading more by him, and I was like, I'll just get through a double star and I'll be done, but it was really quite good. I finally finished Blue Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, so I am done with the Mars trilogy. I will eventually do that overview of the series, so I won't talk about it very much here. Quick version is I love the first two books very, very much, and Blue Mars is also quite excellent, but I thought just a tiny step down in my enjoyment level. A few of the passages seemed a bit more tedious and lengthy than I wanted them to be, but still a really good book and a very, very good science fiction series. Stations of the Tide by Michael Swanwick. This was a Nebula Award winner in 89 or 90, I think. I thought this was science fiction. When I started reading it, I immediately classified it as fantasy. It has elements of both. There's like a voodoo-inspired magical system, but the entire story is very science fictional. It takes place on a different planet. Basically, this bureaucrat, who's only referred to as the bureaucrat, goes down to this planet seeking a man, a renegade, a revolutionary who calls himself a wizard, and he's trying to find the guy and get him for having proscribed technology that he's not supposed to have. And then it just turns into this like psychedelic trip, and whoa, I'm not even sure how to describe this. It is a like acid trip of combination of science fiction and fantasy. I think this book would probably be a good one for me to reread at some point. I read it quite quickly and it is so hectic. There is so much going on, especially in between the lines, that you could really dig into it and get more out of it. It's one of the earlier novels that Swanwick wrote. It's the first novel-length thing I've read by Swanwick, and since I've read more of his recent short fiction, I think that he's come a really long way in improving his storytelling ability and just the solidness of his prose. There's nothing wrong with Stations of the Tide, but I think that I can already see that he's matured quite a bit and gotten better at telling a story very well. I think Swanwick is really good at telling short stories. Like, he's just a master of short fiction. So this is just such a strange book. The more I think about it, the more bizarre it seems to me. I really want to know what other people think about this, if you've read it, and what do you think about this book? The second to last title I have to talk about is The Healer's War by Elizabeth Ann Scarborough, which is a Nebula Award winner. And honestly, I think this is the first book I've read for this project that I don't understand why this is called speculative fiction. It's Vietnam War historical fiction. It has a very tiny magical element, which I feel was kind of shoehorned in. There's a talisman that when worn lets the bearer see auras, see people's emotions and their health status, and it allows you to be a better healer and stuff. The main character is a nurse in the Vietnam War, and like the first half of the book is just about what it's like to be a nurse and be a woman in the Vietnam War, which was actually really interesting. I'm not really into reading like true war type stories, World War II era stuff, Vietnam War stuff. That's not what I enjoy reading. And this book is pretty graphic about some of the atrocities and the wounds that people have and stuff. So it was unpleasant to read some of those things. But it was interesting enough because I feel like it's quite autobiographical. Scarborough herself was a nurse in the Vietnam War, and I think she was compelled to write this book kind of about that experience. The second half is where the fantasy element kind of comes in. One of the natives has this talisman and he gives it to the main character before he dies, and then somehow she ends up in the jungle with this injured boy and is trying to get back where it's safe. And there's this epilogue where Scarborough talks about how she needed a way for the main character to not die. She says if a woman was really in this situation, she would be dead on page 2. She would not have survived this. So she had to give the character something to keep her alive, and it's this talisman. So I felt there was just too many conveniences in the plot, and while knowing about this experience and that it was probably quite realistic was educational and informative, the ending didn't really give me anything. I guess maybe because it's about PTSD and the experience of Vietnam War vets and coming back and feeling, as with probably any soldier coming back from a war, that you were never really leaving the war. But I felt like the story kind of fizzled out rather than having a definitive ending. The final one I want to mention is 2312 by Kim Stanley Robinson. I actually read this at the beginning of December, but I'm going to have so many other things to put into my December wrap-up for this project, just gonna mention it here. I've already filmed an entire video on this book, so that will be forthcoming, and I guess the short version is, it was okay, but I didn't think it was anywhere near as good as the Mars trilogy by Robinson. Alright guys, those are all of the Hugo and Nebula Award winners I read in November. I've got 10 more to read, I think, so I'm gonna be busy in December. I can still get this done by the end of the year. Wish me luck, and I'll be back to talk to you about more of these in the future. And until then, bye.